yourself to the ladies and gentlemen.
David Whitehead.
And David, where are you currently employed?
I'm employed at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory in Pearl, Mississippi.
And you're our first witness from the crime lab today, the Forensics Laboratory. So could you explain for the ladies and gentlemen what you guys do over there?
We provide forensic examinations to 8 law enforcement agencies in the state of Mississippi.
What is your position at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
I'm a forensic scientist as well as the section chief of the trace evidence section, the supervisor.
And what exactly does a section chief of trace evidence do?
We do items of trace evidence, gunshot residue, hair, fibers, paints, glass, fire debris. We have probably $1.5 million worth of analytical equipment, as well as I'm the supervisor of that section responsible for the technical aspects of the trace evidence section.
And how long have you been employed there with the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
I've been with the laboratory since January of '94, so a little over 30 years.
Do you have any previous experience testifying as a forensic scientist and with a subspecialty of trace evidence?
Yes, ma'am. I've testified probably north of 400 times in circuit court in Mississippi, circuit court in Louisiana, as well as federal court in the state of Mississippi. As a matter of fact, I've testified here on several occasions.
And if you could give the ladies and gentlemen just a kind of background on what education you have and kind of how you got to be in this role.
Yes, ma'am. I hold degrees in chemistry and forensic science from the University of Mississippi. I've attended numerous schools and seminars over the years. I've been to the FBI Academy in Quantico, several different classes. I've been to McCrone Research Institute in Chicago. I'm certified by the American Board of Criminalistics after passing the national certification test in 1998. So my certification is in comprehensive criminalistics. I'm also a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Southern Association of Forensic Scientists, and the American Society of Trace Evidence Examiners. And of course, our laboratory is an accredited laboratory. We're accredited by the organization called ANAB.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to have this witness tendered as an expert as a forensic scientist with a specialty in trace evidence.
You wish the board out?
No, objection to him as a witness or an expert witness.
Without objection, he'll be admitted as an expert witness in the field of forensic science with a specialty in trace evidence. You may proceed.
Mr. Whitehead, if you could explain to us exactly what trace evidence is.
Trace evidence deals with small items of evidence, trace amounts. We analyze such things as I previously stated, hairs, textile fibers, paints, glass, gunshot residue, and in addition to that, fire debris type evidence where we're looking at charred debris for ignitables. We do a lot of comparison work where we're comparing unknown samples to known samples. But probably our biggest caseload is gunshot residue examinations. We probably get about 400 or 500 of those cases in a year. And our second most caseload is going to be fire debris.
And what is gunshot residue?
Gunshot residue is produced when a weapon is discharged, and what will happen is you'll get gases escaping any opening in the weapon. We're specifically looking for primer residue, which comes from the primer cup. So when the firing pin strikes in the weapon strikes the ammunition, the primer cup, it ignites those components. That ignites the gunpowder, which is what propels a projectile out the end of the barrel. You'll get these gases escaping any opening in the barrel. When it hits the cooler air outside the weapon, it'll condense into particles. These particles are microscopic in size. They contain lead, barium, and antimony, and they will have a spherical morphology.
And what type of testing, or can you describe for us how you test for gunshot residue?
We utilize what is called a scanning electron microscope with an energy dispersive X-ray analyzer. That's a fancy name for a large microscope that analyzes these tiny particles. Since they're about a micron in diameter, you have to have a pretty powerful instrument to look for these. The microscope actually visualizes the particles. The X-ray detector actually tells us the composition of those particles. And again, we're looking for lead, barium, and antimony particles. Those are what are produced from primer residue.
And I want to take just a step back. You mentioned earlier that the lab is accredited. Do you also undergo like performance testings on the machinery that you use?
We're accredited every 4 years, so every 4 years a team comes in and inspects all aspects of the organization, as well as we're proficiency tested every year. So every year we complete proficiency tests that are outside proficiency tests, and we to look for things like gunshot residue or the other disciplines.
And for people that are not familiar with those proficiency tests, is that like I would do my research or my testing, I would submit my report, and an outside agency would then review everything and make sure that that was proper?
Sort of like that. What we do is the outside agency will produce the proficiency tests. They have an expected outcome of those tests, and the report will be issued after the report is published on what that proficiency test is. So there is an expected answer to those tests.
Excuse me for speaking of you, back in March of 2024 through currently, was your proficiency testing at the crime lab, and you're specifically up to date?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I just completed a GSR proficiency test.
Mr. Whitehead, did you have the opportunity to work on Mississippi Crime Lab case number 24003-524?
I did.
And who was the suspect in that case?
The suspect was listed as being a Carly Greggs.
And the work and the testing that you did on that case, was that also reviewed by anyone else?
It was. All of our casework is reviewed by a second examiner, and that particular examiner in this case was Jacob Birchfield.
And did he agree with the results of your findings?
He did.
What evidence did you review or did you receive in order to do your testing?
I received a gunshot residue evidence collection kit labeled as coming from Carly Gregg.
Permission to approach witness, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
I handed you what's previously been marked as Exhibit 43. Have you seen that item before?
I have. This is a gunshot residue evidence collection kit. I can identify it by the crime lab case number, submission number on the barcode that was placed there by an evidence tech when it was received into the laboratory. I can also identify it by the green evidence seal that I placed after the analysis was complete with my initials and date across that seal.
And being that that is still sealed, does that appear to be in the same or similar condition as when you closed it?
It does.
And for what purpose did you review that piece of evidence?
This item of evidence was analyzed for the presence of gunshot residue.
And did you perform that testing to see if there was gunshot residue present? Did you prepare a report with your findings in that case?
Yes, ma'am.
Permission to approach witness, Your Honor? Is that an accurate copy of your report?
Yes, ma'am. This is a copy of the certified report that I issued in this particular case.
And that contains your findings?
It does.
And it bears your signature?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we'd ask that this be marked as the state's next exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Be admitted S51, all purposes.
If you would, Mr. Whitehead, if you could explain, I know you've talked about what gunshot residue is and that you tested that particular kit. If you could just walk us through the testing on this particular item and what your findings were.
Yes, ma'am. This particular kit contained 2 adhesive tape lifts labeled right hand and left hand. The adhesive tape lifts, the idea is if there's any residue on the surface of a person's hands, it will be picked up by the adhesive tape lift. Those samples were then placed into the scanning electron microscope and analyzed for the presence of gunshot residue, and I reported out the results of that analysis.
And what were the results in this case?
Particles of gunshot residue were positively identified on the right hand, labeled as coming from Carly Gregg's, and the left hand, labeled as coming from Carly Gregg's.
And based on your training and experience, is the results rendered reliable?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
No questions of this witness, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be finally excused by the state?
Yes, sir.
By the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you're free to go, Ms. Morris. The state may call its next witness.
Second call is Nathan Hawley.
Nathan Holly.
If you would introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Sure. My name is Nathan Holly. The last name is Holly.
And Nathan, where are you currently employed?
I'm employed at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory in Pearl, Mississippi.
Nathan, what do you do there at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
So I'm a forensic biologist specializing in DNA analysis.
And does that require any type of specialized training?
Training that I have is from the forensics laboratory.
What about your educational background? Could you tell us what that is?
Sure. I have a bachelor's in biology with a minor in chemistry from the University of Southern Mississippi.
And how long have you been employed? I'm sorry, you might have already said that. How long have you been employed with the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
17 years next month.
And have you been doing DNA evidence and testing that entire time?
Yes, I have.
Do you have any prior experience testifying as a forensic scientist specializing in DNA evidence?
Yes, I do.
How many times would you estimate that you've been certified as an expert?
Approximately 27.
Your Honor, at this point, we would tender the expert to this witness as an expert in forensic science and DNA analysis.
Any
No objection.
All right, he'll be admitted without objection as an expert, as a forensic scientist, as an expert in the area of forensic science, particularly DNA analysis. You may proceed.
Mr. Hawley, if you could tell us, for those of us that are not science people, what DNA is.
Sure. So DNA first stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's a molecule that's found within the cells of the human body. And what DNA does is it tells the body how to build cells and also how to function and work those cells properly. A person gets their DNA half from their mom and half from their dad, and it's that combination of those two separate DNAs that gives everybody, except for identical twins, a unique DNA profile.
And when you do DNA testing, what are we talking about? What's done with our DNA?
Sure. So with the DNA testing, I'm looking at certain locations on that DNA molecule, and there are forensic tests that can determine what a person's DNA looks like at those locations. And I basically take items of evidence and I do the DNA process on those, and then I take reference samples or known samples, and then I compare those two DNA profiles to determine whether or not that person's DNA is there.
And a known sample would be like if a swab was taken from my mouth, we would know that that was my sample. Is that right?
Right. It's a known or reference.
And then an unknown sample would be something that you would collect or that law enforcement would collect on a piece of evidence and send that to you.
That's correct.
We just heard from Mr. Whitehead that the entire forensics laboratory, of course, is accredited. Is the DNA section of the laboratory also, does that fall under the accreditation?
Yes, it does.
And do you follow proper protocol there?
Yes, we do.
Have you personally provided or undergone any proficiency testing?
Yes.
If you could explain that to the ladies and gentlemen.
For DNA, we're proficiency tested twice a year, and it's from an outside company. And basically, it is for us to demonstrate that we are capable to do the DNA process or our job. And so there's a correct answer for that, and they double check us on that.
And your proficiency is up to date.
Yes.
Did you have the opportunity to work on a case? It's Mississippi Forensics Laboratory case number 24-003524.
Yes, I did.
May I approach, in performing that work, did you actually did you render a report?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Mr. Holly, before you can do any testing there at the crime lab, you have to receive certain pieces of evidence. Is that right?
That's correct.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? I'm handing you what's previously been marked as Exhibit 47, 48, 49, and 50. If you could, starting with number 47, tell me what that is and how you know what that is.
So this is it is a buccal swab of Carly Gregg's left cheek, and it is, I can identify it from the crime lab barcode, which has the case number and submission number on it.
And did you, is there also a buccal swab of her right cheek?
Yes,
And did you rely on that evidence in your testing in this case?
I did.
I also handed you another item, looks like 2 additional swabs. Could you tell us what those were from?
So one is a swab from a hammer of a Taurus revolver. And once again, I can identify it by the crime lab barcode that has a case number and submission number, as well as the evidence tape with my date and initial on it. And then the other one is a swab taken off of a trigger of the firearm.
In performing DNA testing, do you actually have to, well, can you describe for us, like you take an extract from something?
Yes. So the DNA process starts with extraction. And what I'm doing during the extraction is I'm actually removing the cells off of whatever substrate they're on, whether it's a swab or a cutting. And I'm lysing open that cell and getting rid of all the other cellular components except for the DNA. So the only thing that I'm left with is that isolated DNA.
Did you do that in this particular case?
Yes, I did.
Permission to approach the witness.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize the item that I've just handed you?
Yes.
And what are those?
So these would be the DNA extracts from my extractions on the items of evidence.
And there's 4 total, but I just want to talk about, is there one for the swab from the trigger and then one from the swab of the hammer of a firearm?
Yes, there are.
Your Honor, we'd ask that that be marked as state's next exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection, no.
Mr. Holly, the report that you prepared, did someone else review that work that you had done?
Yes, they did.
And did they agree with your findings?
Yes, they did.
And if you could tell us about the 2 items, I think I misspoke earlier in this case when I said that there was a DNA match on the hammer. Could you tell us what your findings were with regards to the hammer, the swab from the hammer on the Taurus gun?
Due to an insufficient amount of genetic information, no comparable results were obtained for the swab from hammer.
What about for the trigger of the Taurus firearm?
The DNA test results for the swab from trigger produced a partial profile which is consistent with the reference sample of the suspect. Therefore, Carly Gregg is not excluded as a possible DNA donor to this sample. Ashley Smiley is excluded as a possible DNA donor to this sample.
So explain that, because when I first read one of these reports, I was like, what does that mean, not excluded? In layman's term, I'd say that's them. But in scientific terms, you have to say that they can't be ruled out, right?
Right. So in this case, the DNA that is there, it does match to Carly Gregg's DNA.
Is there a quantification? Do you put a certain number, like 1 in so many people, that DNA belongs to?
So anytime there is a match made, we do give a status statement, and I can read that one and then explain it to you. For the 8 markers compared, the genetic profile for the DNA donor of the swab from trigger occurs with a frequency of approximately 1 in greater than 10 billion random unrelated persons of the Caucasian, African American, and the Hispanic population. And so that stat is supposed to give weight to how common or how rare you would expect that profile. And in this case, it would be a rare profile.
And as I understand it, the 1 in 10 billion is actually just the forensic laboratory's cutoff. You got to stop it at a certain point.
That's right. Once the numbers get so big, it's hard to understand. We usually cap it at above the world population, which is, last time I checked, around 8 billion. So we cap it at 10 billion.
And to be clear, your report excludes Ashley Smiley as a DNA donor on the trigger of the gun.
That's correct.
Court's indulgence. No further questions, Ryan.
Cross-examination.
No questions of the witness, sir.
May this witness be finally released by the state?
Yes, sir.
By the defense?
Yes, sir.
You're free to go. Please leave your exhibits up there. State may call its next witness.
The state calls Felicia McIntire. Ms. McIntire, if you would introduce yourself to the jury, please.
Miss Felicia McIntire, first name Felicia, last name McIntire.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed with the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory located in Pearl.
And what are your duties there? Or sorry, what is your position there at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
I'm the section chief over the firearm and toolmark unit.
And what are your duties as the section chief of the Firearms and Toolmark division?
As the section chief, I oversee the administrative and personnel matters within our division, but also act as a forensic scientist specializing in firearm and toolmark identification, which allows me to compare bullets, cartridge cases, or other ammunition components to see if they were fired in a particular firearm.
And how long have you been employed with the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
Since November of 2008.
Do you have any previous experience as a forensic scientist specializing in firearms and toolmark examination?
I was trained with the Indiana State Police beginning in 2005.
Would you give the jury your educational background?
Yes. I earned a Bachelor of Science in Forensic Science from Eastern Kentucky University.
And have you completed any specialized training in forensic science and firearms and toolmarks?
Yes. When employed with the Indiana State Police, I completed a 2-year apprenticeship-style training program, which included lots of literature references, touring of various firearm and ammunition manufacturing facilities, supervised casework, mock and written exams, and then I continue to travel annually to different seminars and to maintain certification.
And have you previously been accepted as an expert witness as a forensic scientist in firearms and toolmarks?
I have.
How many times would you estimate that?
Near 100 at this point.
Your Honor, at this time we'd move to have this witness tendered as an expert in forensic science and firearms and toolmarks.
No objection.
Without objection, shall be admitted as an expert in the area of firearms and toolmarks. Firearms and toolmarks and toolmark identification. You can proceed.
Ms. McIntire, if you could kind of talk to us about what ballistics are.
The field of firearms examination has as its main concern to determine if a bullet or cartridge case was fired in a particular firearm. We're able to do that through class and individual characteristics. More specifically, when a gun is manufactured, some features of that firearm are determined by that manufacturer. Those are considered class characteristics. The caliber, the way that the firearm is rifled, so the number of lands and grooves that are put inside that barrel, those are put there to help impart spin on the bullet, but those are determined by that manufacturer. Incidental to that manufacturing process, individual marks are left behind. So those are things that happen as a result of the machining processes or use and abuse over time that cannot be determined by the manufacturer. And those marks are unique to a particular firearm. I'm looking for both those class and individual marks on a microscope when I'm comparing these items. So I'm looking at a comparison microscope, which is just 2 regular stereo microscopes joined by an optical bridge, so I can see 2 different items through one field of view. So in a case matter, we'll be looking for those class and individual marks on unknown items versus items I know were test fired from a particular firearm.
When you talk about test firing, where do you get the items that you use to conduct test firing?
When a firearm is submitted to the laboratory, I will generate those knowns. So I'm making test fires. I'm getting reference ammunition that we have at the laboratory that has been purchased, and I'm firing it in the gun that has been submitted for testing. I do that in a water tank. That's literally just a 12-foot deep tank of water that allows me to discharge the firearm. Those individual marks are placed on it, and they're not affected at all by the water, so I can retrieve it to have intact knowns to compare to my unknowns.
And I want to take a step back. We spoke with two experts previously about proficiency testing, and I want to make sure that you two, Ms. McIntire, have performed and essentially passed your proficiency testing.
Yes, the firearms unit also completes annual proficiency testing, which I have taken and passed this year.
Did you have the opportunity to be involved in crime lab number 24-003524?
I did.
And who was the suspect in that case?
Suspect is listed as a Carly Gregg, spelled C-A-R-L-Y, last name G-R-E-G-G.
And the testing that you performed, was that reviewed by anyone there at the Mississippi Forensics Laboratory?
Yes, it was.
And did they agree with your results?
They did.
In preparation, or at the conclusion of your testing, did you prepare a report with your findings?
I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Ms. McIntire, what I've handed you, does that appear to be a true and accurate copy of the report that you prepared in this particular case?
Yes, it does.
You mentioned that you use test firing ammo. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? I'm sorry, may I have that moved as state's next exhibit before I move on?
Any objection to the report?
Yeah, objection.
Objection. The report will be admitted as S-53 without objection.
I'm handing you what's been marked, or has not been marked. Could you tell me what that is, please?
Yes, for the record, I've been handed a test fire envelope that bears crime laboratory number 24-003524. I recognize this envelope as it bears the crime laboratory barcode with the case number and submission number. My initials are placed upon it when I created it, as well as a tape seal of my date and initials when I completed my examination of these items.
And does that appear to be in a unaltered form since you sealed that envelope?
Yes, the seals are still intact.
Your Honor, we'd ask that that be marked as the state's next exhibit.
Any objection?
Yeah, objection, Your Honor.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
I've handed you two items that have been previously marked as S1, S41 and S42. Do you recognize both of those items as well?
I do.
And what are those?
State's Exhibit 41 is Crime Laboratory Submission 5 in the above mentioned case. This is a sealed plastic bag containing a manila envelope labeled Bullet from Brain. State's Exhibit 42 is Crime Laboratory Submission 4. I recognize my markings on this item as well. It is a sealed plastic bag containing a manila envelope labeled Bullet from Back of Neck.
I'm also handing you what's previously been marked as S40. If you would take a look at that and tell me if you can identify that.
State's Exhibit 40 is Crime Laboratory Submission 6. I recognize the markings on the box here. This particular box contains one Taurus revolver. I also recognize my inscription and the serial number that are on this revolver within the box.
Ms. McIntire, we've talked about the bullet removed from Ashley Smiley's neck. The projectile. The one removed from her brain, the .357 Taurus, and then the test fires that you used. Was there any other evidence that you relied upon in rendering your opinions in this particular case?
No, ma'am.
And were you able to, can you walk us through what testing specifically was done on these items?
Yes, ma'am. When I received the firearm, I worked up a general worksheet documenting those class characteristics that we spoke about. I then used the reference ammunition we discussed, test fired this particular firearm into the water tank, thus generating the test fires here in State's Exhibit 55. I then took the test fires in State's Exhibit 55, and compared those on a comparison microscope to both the projectile in States Exhibit 41 and the projectile in States Exhibit 42 to arrive at my conclusions about whether or not they originated from States Exhibit 40.
And what was your conclusion?
The projectiles in States Exhibit 41 and 42 were fired in the gun in States Exhibit 40.
And based on your training and experience, do you consider the results that you did in this particular case to be reliable?
Yes, ma'am.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
No questions.
May the witness be excused by the state?
Yes, sir.
By the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're free to go.
Thanks.
Do you have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Camp, can you approach? Y'all approach real quick. Having arrested its case in chief, it's about 4:50 in the afternoon. I'm going to release you for the evening, but I'm going to remind you, you're not to talk about this case. You're not to watch any news accounts of this case. You're not to get on social media. Does everybody understand? All right, I'm going to need you back in the jury room tomorrow morning, 8:45, ready to go. All right? Everyone please remain seated while the jury exits.